Shavua Tov. Today's daf is daf Kuf Aleph. And we're talking about a case of someone who eats Gid Anosha of a non-kosher animal. And there are a number of possibilities. One possibility is that he should be Chayv Shtayim. He violates two different Isurim, both that of Achilas Behemoth Mea and that of Achilas Gid Anosha, and therefore he gets two sets of malchus. The other possibility is to say, well, maybe he shouldn't get two sets of malchus. He should only get one set of malchus because one Isur cannot be chal on another Isur. And the third possibility, which is Reb Shimon on the top of our Omud for today, Kuf Aleph, is that he's not chayiv at all. So the Gemara immediately asks for Rabbi Shimon Mimonavshach. No matter how you slice the cake, so to speak, with regard to Isur Chal Isur, can a second Isur be Chal on the first Isur? Is L'chayev Nami Mishum Gid. He should be chayev two sets of malchus, like Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. But ein Isur Chal Isur, if Rabbi Shimon accepts the principle that a second Isur cannot be Chal on top of the first Isur, okay, so let one Isur be Chal, L'chayev Mishum Tuma, let him be chayev for eating a non-kosher meat, to kodim, because that emerged first with the limbs of the fetus, even though if we wait a little longer, there'll be sinews, and then the Gid Anosha Isur will emerge, but first comes the Isur of Behemoth Mea. But maybe he'll answer, Ein Begid Ben Osein Tam. So let's say he's not going to be chayev for eating Behemoth Mea because he only ate the Gid, and the Gid is like eights. It doesn't have any tam, but nevertheless, the Gemara objects, L'chayev Mishum Gid. So if you remove the Isur of Behemoth Mea, then automatically the Isur of Gid Anosha Bichal, and Gid Anosha applies even if Ein Begid Ben Osein Tam. So at this point, the Gemara is kind of stuck, and we don't understand how Rabbi Shimon could argue that you're not chayev at all. And we're going to have a number of interpretations of Rabbi Shimon. The most pronounced of them are that of Rava and Rav Ashi. So let's start with Rava. Omar Rava, Olam Kasar Ein Begid Ben Osein Tam. You can't be chayev when you eat the gid, according to Rav Shimon, for consumption of a behemoth mea, because you only ate eights. You didn't eat the basar of a behemoth mea. Fine. So Ein Begid Ben Osein Tam, which would exempt you from the chiyuv of behemoth mea. But what about the chiyuv of Gid Anosha? Is it possible that there's no Gid Anosha in a behemoth mea? V'shayni hasam. As far as Gid is concerned, it's a little bit different. The Omar Kro, the Torah says, Al Kain lo yochlu b'nei Yisrael es Gid Anosha. Meaning, the animal you can eat, but the Gid Anosha you cannot eat. So Misha Gido Osur Ubasaro Mutter. If you're talking about a case of a kosher animal where the Torah specifies that don't eat the gid, had it been a non-kosher animal, the Torah didn't have to specify don't eat the gid because it's part of the violation of consumption of a behemoth mea. So Misha Gido Asur Ubasaru Mutter, but Yotzasa Zu, to the exclusion of Gid Anosha and Behemoth Mea, Shegido Asur Basaro Asur, that both the Gid and the Basar is Asur. The Torah says, don't eat the Gid, meaning implying you can eat the Basar. But in the case of a non-kosher species, a non-kosher animal, Behemoth Mea, then you can't eat the Basar. So it can't fit into this description of Gid Anosha that says, well, don't eat the Gid, but eat the Basar. So the bottom line in summarizing Rava's conclusion in interpreting Reb Shimon holds, Ein begidim b'nosein tam, you can't be chayiv for achilas basar nevel, a basar of a tmeya, and you can't be chayiv for gid because there's no gid in a behemoth tmeya. Om Rav Yehuda Marav. Now we want to know about nevela. Like, what's the deal with gid anosha of a nevela? Are you chayiv for both gid and for nevela? Om Rav Yehuda Marav. Rabbi Meir indeed holds mechayiv shtayim, chayiv for both gid anosha and for achilas nevela, which means that if he ate the gid, it must be that he's chayiv for nevela because yesh begid b'nosein tam. But it seems like Rabbi Meir is not operating with the principle of ein iser chalal iser, which is something that we'll have to understand. Chachamim omrim. So wait a minute. Before we go on to the Chachamim, let's just make one important point with regard to Rabbi Meir, who holds yesh begidin b'nosein tam, and the iser nevela, which will be chal as soon as the animal dies, will be added on top of the iser gid, and the reason for that is that we have here what's called an iser kolel. Iser kolel means if the second iser extends and applies to a greater circumference, then the second iser is chal on top of the first iser. And here, the iser nevela is an iser kolel because it applies to all the basar of the nevela, the entire animal, as opposed to gid anosha, which is limited to that one vein. That one sinew, we'll call. Chachamim omrim enu chayv hala achas. Chachamim are going to reject the principle of iser kolel. They're going to therefore apply the principle of ein iser chal iser. The iser of gid anosha was chal before nevela, and it doesn't leave room for the iser nevela to be chal. And therefore, the Chacham are going to say you can't get two sets of malchus for both the violation of achilas basar nevela, and on top of that, get another set of malchus for eating the gid of this nevela, because they never accepted iser kolel. And therefore, we're going to apply the principle of ein iser chal iser, and the iser nevela cannot be chal on top of the iser gid anosha which preceded it. Modim chacham Rabbi Meir be ochel gid anosha shel olav shel shar niskal shechav shtayim. Now, in addition to iser kolel, we have an iser chamur, which means that the second iser has two uppits on the first. Number one, it's kolel, which means that it expands the application of the iser. And number two, it's an iser mosif chumra. It adds a chumra that didn't exist before. And what is the chumra that we're adding now? Because basar ola, that's what I meant to say, is asur bana. So whereas gid anosha is mutar bana, you could sell to a goy. But in the case of a carbon ola, the hegdesh generates an iser ano. You can't benefit from it at all. So therefore, the iser of ola, of achilas ola, will be chal on top of the iser gid anosha. That's called modem chacham Rabbi Meir. So that's the chumrah of ola on top of gid anosha. Gid anosha itself is mutar bana. Ola is Asr Bano. Now, the Gemara proceeds to try to analyze, can we identify the Chachamim of Rabbi Meir as a particular Tana, meaning Chachamim doesn't, it's too general of a term to tell you who amongst the Chachamim actually maintain that position. So basically, what the Gemara is out to look for is a Tana that holds that Iser Kolel could not be Chal because of any Iser Chal Iser. But if it's not only an Iser Kolel, but in addition, it's an Iser Chamur, then the combination of those two will be mafkia the din of ein Iser Chal Iser, and the second Iser Bichal in the first. Uman Haitana, the Iser Kolel, is then, if it's only an Iser Kolel, you only have that one element is Iser Chal al Iser Lesle. We're not going to apply the principle that the second Iser, which is the Kolel, is Chal on top of the first one. But Iser Kolel be Iser Chamur. If you have the combination of both Kolel and Chamur, Isle, then we say that the second Iser, which is both Kolel and Chamur, will be Chal on top of the first Iser. Amarav Rabbi Yossi Aglili. We can identify that Tana as Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Now, all we have to do is prove that Rabbi Yossi Aglili does not hold from Iser Kolel alone. Once we prove that, then we can assume that if you add to the Iser Kolel and Iser Chamur, then Rabbi Yossi would hold the second Iser, which is both Kolel and Chamur, will be Chal on top of the first Iser. This not. We learned in a Mishnah in the end of Maseches Zvachim, Tomei sha'ochal kodesh, bein kodesh tomei, bein kodesh tor, chayav. So the chiyuv here is for a tomei sha'ochal basar kodesh, which is a chiyuv kares b'mezid. Any chiyuv kares b'mezid automatically is a chiyuv of a korban chatos b'shogeg. And this man was shogeg, and he was tomei. He wasn't aware of the fact that he was tomei. Or alternatively, maybe he was aware of the fact that he was tomei, but he wasn't aware that that what he's eating is sanctified food. It's kodesh. And now we have the din of a tomei shachal kodesh. Tomei shachal kodesh is chayav kares b'mezid and chatos b'shogeg. Now, let's just point out the chiddush here of the Tanakama, we're about to learn the dissenting view of Rabbi Yossi, is that even though this Tameh ate Basar Kodesh that was Tameh already, Bishleim, I understand, I have no qualms about it, that if this Tameh ate Tahar, right? So Tameh that eats Basar Kodesh that's Tahar is Chayv Kares. That's explicit in the Torah. But this Tana is going a step further, and he's saying that even if the Tameh ate Basar Kodesh that was Nitma already, which means he's not adding any new Tumah, the Tumah pre-existed, nevertheless he's Chayiv Kares, and B'shogeg is Chayiv Achatos, and Rabbi Yossi Aglili disagrees, and he says Tameh Shachas Hator Chayiv, that's hands down, that's already a parsha in the Torah that a Tameh that eats Kodesh Tahar is Chayiv Kares. But Tameh Shachal Satameh, if both he, the Ochel, has Tumas Haguf, and the Kodesh that he ate was also Tameh, is then part why? Shlo Ochel Dover Tameh. What did he add over here? He was Tameh, but the Basa was already Tameh. If the Basa is Tameh, then his Achila of Basa Tameh doesn't change anything by one iota. Amrullah, the Chacham say, what kind of argument is that? If I take your logic, Rabbi Yossi, to its conclusion, then I'm in a I'm up against a brick wall. Why? Because af Tommy Shachal Satar. Your logic that, by a tummy eating basa tummy, he doesn't change anything, he doesn't add anything. We should apply that to even the case of tummy who eats tar. Why? Because the very moment he lifts up the ochel in order to eat it, his maga is already mitame the kodesh. And kevin shenogabo tim ohu. So now what are you going to tell me? That there's no such thing as a tame who's chayav eating who's chayav kares for eating kodshim tahorim, because it's always going to be tame, because the very moment he scoops it up to bring it into his mouth, he was mitame it. So what he ate afterwards was tame, was kodesh tame. I mean, Tosfos points out here that the Gemara could have come up with an answer, which is called tochav lo bebeis habliya. We've had it in the past, where somebody else puts the kodesh into your mouth, so you never actually came in contact with your mouth. So that would be a case of tomei shachal as hatar. But the Gemara doesn't want to go into that kind of ukimta, that kind of strange case. So the Gemara immediately asks Shapir ka'omale Rabbanan Rabbi Yosef Haglili, what would Rabbi Yosef Haglili respond in self-defense against the argument that is so powerful of the Chachamim? Amar Rava, again, Rava is trying to defend Rabbi Yosef Haglili against the onslaught of the Chachamim. B'nitma guf yachak nitma basu kuyam lo pligi chayev. The Isur Kares Kodem Ki Pligi, the Machlokas is only in a case where Benitma Basav Yakach Nitma Guf. What was the sequence? That's Rava's analysis. What was the sequence of the Tumas Haguf of the Ochel and the Tumas HaOchel Shel Kodesh? What came first? If he was Nitma Gufo at time T1, and at that moment in time the Kodesh was Tar, then at that moment he already incurs a potential Chiyuv Kares if he goes ahead and eats the Tar. And therefore that Isur, which is a Chiyuv Kares, is Chal, and it can never be removed. Masha Enker, if let's say the Basa was Nitma before he became Tameh, that's where Rabbi Yossi disagrees with the Chacham, and he holds that in such a case, when he becomes Tameh, he doesn't create any Isur vis-a-vis the Basa, because the Basa is already Tameh. And that's where Rabbi Yossi says, Af shelo ochal ela dover Tameh. Okay, now, at this point that we've made some logical sense out of the sheet of Rabbi Yossi Haglili, and we came to the conclusion that according to Rabbi Yossi Haglili, he would be chayav kares if his tumas haguf predated the tumas hakodesh. So what now is the machlokas between the Chachamim and Rabbi Meir? Between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yossi Haglili, sorry. So the answer is going to be, I'm just anticipating what we'll read in a second, that we get into the issue of Ein Isur Chalalisa. Why? Because if the Basa was Nitma before the Ochel contracted Tumas Haguf, then There's a separate lav in the Torah for eating basar kodesh shenitma. And therefore, the second Isur cannot be chal on the first Isur, meaning when the Gavra contracts Tumah and the basar itself is already Tameh, at that point, we have to apply the principle of Ein Isur Chal Isur. But what do the Chacham hold? Rabbanan Islay Isur Kolel. The Rabbanan say that now that you have contracted Tumas Haguf, that's an Isur Kolel, meaning it's more inclusive because it includes any Basar Kodesh than the Isur vis-a-vis Tameh. Let me just double check that. Oh yeah, the Gemara spells it out. Demigu de mechayev achatichos tahoros di alma mechayev nami achaticha tmeya. Meaning, the circumference of the original Isur before the Gavra contracted Tumah was very limited. It's a tar sha'achal tameh. That we know. But he's allowed to eat everything else that's Kodesh because it's all tar. Now he became Tameh, and now the Isur expands to include all Kodshim, even Tahorim. And that's called an Isur Kolel, and that's where the Rabbanan step up to the plate and they hold that an Isur Kolel is Chal on an Isur, on the first Isur. Rabbi Yosef Glil, less Isur Kolel. The Migulo Amridan, he never accepted this logic. He's not going to buy into the thesis that an Isur Kolel is Chayiv on an Isur. And Memela, the Gemara holds that, according to Rabbi Yossi, the only time the second Isur Bichal is if, in addition to being an Isur Kolel, it's an Isur Chom. And that's what the Gemara asks here. The Gemara says, "For Rabbi Yossi Aglili Nehi de Isur Kolel Lesle be Isur Kal, Yavo Isur Chomur." V'yachal Isur Kalamayniu Tumas Haguf Shrei Tumas Haguf B'Kares. 1 second. If a Tahar eats Basar Tameh, he violates a lav in the Torah and he gets Malchus for that, but he doesn't get Kares. But now that he became Tameh, a Tameh Sha'achal Kodesh is Chayiv Kares. So therefore, the second Isur, which will be Chal, is now not only an Isur Kolel, because as a result of his Tumas Haguf, he's not allowed to eat any Kodshim, but it's also an Isur Chomor because now it generates a Chiyuv Kares. Okay. Now we're up to Rav Ashi. Oh, wait a second. We have to add 1 point before we go on to Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi is coming to salvage our understanding of Rabbi Yosef because right now we're really stuck. What problem do we have now at this juncture? We said, according to Rav's interpretation of Rabbi Yosef Aglili, that in a case where let me just get the sequence. Case where he so Rava said that if the food became tameh first, the food became right. Ki pligi benitma basar v'akach nitma gufa. And Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold from Isa Kolel. See, even though Nitmak Gufo is now an Isa Kol, he can't eat any Basar Kodesh. But nevertheless, Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, Ein Isa Chalisa. But wait a minute. According to this interpretation, we're stuck. We got a major barrier here. Why? Because if the food became tameh, then eating that food, that kodesh, is only a lav. But now he became tameh. If he became tameh, then now there's an isa kares for him to eat kodshim, even kodshim tmeim. So therefore, it's not only an isa kolel, but it's an isa chamor, because now we upgrade the punishment to the level of a kares. So why does Rabbi Yossi Aglili say, Ein isa chalisa? Rav Ashi, man lemalon de tumas haguf chamura, dilma tumas basar chamura. Our problem is predicated on the assumption that when he contracts tumas haguf, that's going to jack up the chumra sa'isa. Why? Because now there's a chiv kares. Rav Ashi says, no. The fact that the basar was tameh, that's the chumrah. Why? The iser on the gavra, when he contracts tumas haguf, although I admit it's a chiv kares, but nevertheless, you could be matir that iser. All he has to do is jump into a mikvah. But in the case of basar and nitma, that's more chamer. There's nothing you could do with basar and nitma. It's always tameh. That's the brilliance of Rav Ashi.